The federal government has spied illegally on hundreds of thousands of Americans. This is a fact that was exposed by brave journalists and whistleblowers in the early 2010s. We need to be wary of government overreach and oversight, and that one example is one in so many of why we should be wary of government overreach and oversight. Social media is better functioned as an independent private company. I mean, to be sure, private companies are harmed by government overreach in general. And the government regulation of social media companies would lead to increased censorship and First Amendment violations on those platforms. So before we dive into the argument, let's get an idea of why people are calling for social media to be regulated at the federal level. Conservatives and progressives alike have been getting deplatformed on Twitter and other social media sites. The most prominent example is former President Donald Trump, who has been banned from Twitter since the incidents at the Capitol in January. Not just Twitter, other platforms, huge platforms such as Facebook. The actions from these companies have led people on both sides of the aisle to advocate for the federal regulation of social media companies. And these arguments do not recognize the dangers of government overreach. Private companies in general are harmed by government overreach. Government bureaucracies are inefficient. The increased regulation of any sector inevitably means an increase in the bureaucracy and an increase in the government workforce. What made Twitter and other important companies so successful was their ability to operate in an open and free market. Come up with an idea, a great idea, implement that, and not have it hindered by government interference and oversight. The introduction of government oversight will disrupt the free market and harm the environment in which these companies flourished, making it harder to sustain success and create new companies. Indeed, the free market is why social media companies grew to be so successful and important in the first place. Social media companies operate better as private and free entities. They were developed without the government saying what they needed to allow and what they were not allowed to allow on their platforms. Because of that, people had the freedom to develop communities on these platforms and share with one another, something that is so important to not just the political discourse in this country, but so many reaches of life, science, education. Many of these companies do not even have restrictive policies on speech, and they allow so much to be on their platforms, and much of that is in line with First Amendment protections and rights. Introducing government oversight into these platforms will make it harder for these companies to operate and provide the platforms that are so important for so many people, again, for politics, science, education, so many reaches of life. The platforms already have speech policies that allow people to operate freely. And again, they're in line with constitutional rights so many times. People aren't recognizing the danger that the government could pose to speech on these platforms. Government regulation of these companies could lead to an increase in censorship and First Amendment violations. Politics right now, more than ever, is incredibly partisan and polarized today. We, people, cannot trust that putting the regulatory power over social media companies into the federal government will have fair results. I mean, there's so many examples, but most recently, 2 Democratic congresspeople have been putting pressure on TV providers like Comcast to stop airing conservative TV networks such as Fox News and Newsmax. A complete deplatforming of conservative ideas is what they're looking for. This cancel culture will permeate federal decision-making. And we have so many examples of other countries that regulate these social media platforms and other platforms where free speech is curtailed and it is harmful to the marketplace of ideas. We can't trust lawmakers to be fair and uphold First Amendment rights, especially not right now in the hyper-polarized, hyper-partisan environment in which we operate. This regulatory power will be dangerous and, again, threaten the marketplace of ideas. And again, people aren't recognizing the dangers that are present if we allow the government to regulate social media platforms. They say that we can't trust private companies to make these decisions. Indeed, I just proved that we can't trust partisan lawmakers to make these decisions. For social media companies, what they are worried about the most is their bottom line and protecting their bottom line. What will affect their bottom line the most, more than anything, is their protection of free speech on these platforms. If they curtail free speech, people will want to use them less, and they will be harmed publicly, and people will not use them as much. So it will harm their bottom line. This all goes to say that people cannot trust the government to regulate social media, and it's probably better to just trust these private companies who are protecting their bottom lines to make sure that they uphold free speech rights. Private companies operate better without government interference. Social media companies will be better if they're not regulated by federal lawmakers. And like I said, these lawmakers cannot be trusted to uphold free speech rights. Allowing this oversight threatens the freedoms already that are on the platform and what made them so popular. We cannot separate partisan politics from government's intentions. Very wise people have told me to trust when someone shows you who they are. We know that the government has illegally spied on Americans. Turning over the keys to social media to them could be a dire decision. Trust when somebody shows you who they are.